rational judgments, or that what they discovered was objective. It was taken for granted, for example, that in temptation, passion was opposed not to some sentiment, but to reason. Here again he's talking about a classical idea of ethics, and we'd say Christian idea of ethics as well. Thus Plato thought, thus Aristotle, thus Hooker, Butler, and Dr. Johnson. The modern view is very different. It does not believe that value judgments are really judgments at all. They are sentiments, or complexes, or attitudes, produced in a community by the pressure of its environment and its traditions, and differing from one community to another. To say that a thing is good is merely to express our feeling about it. And our feeling about it is the feeling we have been socially conditioned to have. Now, I hear here the anticipation of Alistair McIntyre's magisterial book in the early 80s, After Virtue, in which McIntyre helps us understand what he calls emotivism, the same thing I think Lewis is calling here subjectivism, the idea that all judgments, all value judgments, whether of truth, goodness, or beauty, all value judgments are simply expressions of preference. And McIntyre said that even if theoretically we don't agree with that, we're all practically emotivists. Practically, we tend to live as emotivists. And our politics and our laws are governed increasingly by emotivism. So that once, to use an example, not because I think it's singular in its substance, but rhetorically and verbally, since we live by words, it's significant. What used to be called an unnatural act, that is an act contrary to nature, is now designated as a preference, an alternative preference. And the assumption being that, now we don't call burglars people who have a different acquisitional preference. Yeah. It would be an interesting defense for a defense attorney someday in the future. I'm not suggesting that. But if value judgments are simply expressions of preference, then you can see how our attitude toward sexual ethics has been significantly revised. This is really the main theme in the abolition of man. And it's the objectivity of value, the objectivity of value judgments that Lewis is deeply concerned to defend. Now, he goes on through the essay developing this. I've just read a little bit from the beginning. I want to read a little bit from the end of the essay and then go into my principal presentation historically, kind of teasing out how we got here. One of the great concerns Lewis had then is that Christians were not well equipped to defend their own views of ethics in light of these challenges. And he felt that this was that the church was doing a great disservice if it did not so equip its members to defend historically how the church had always understood truth, goodness, and beauty, to be rooted in some higher reality. A Christianity which does not see moral and religious experience converging to meet at infinity, in the positive infinity of the living yet superpersonal God, has nothing in the long run to divide it from devil worship. What he's saying here is if we don't realize that our religious experience and a spiritual experience in our life and our ethics have the same source, the source in God, in the person of God, then what we call Christian ethics, well, so what? That's your ethics. That's just a provincial, socially conventional ethical system. We have nothing in the long run to divide us from devil worship. A philosophy that is, if we don't realize that ethics are rooted in the reality of God, that judgments of value are rooted in the objectivity that is God. A philosophy which does not accept value as eternal and objective can lead us only to ruin. nor is the matter of merely speculative importance. And here, I thought this was a good place to end this quote because he brings it back to the political life. Many a popular planner on a democratic platform, that is a social planner, many a mild-eyed scientist in a democratic laboratory means, in the last resort, just what the fascist means. He believes that good means whatever men are conditioned to approve. He believes that it is the function of him and his kind to condition men. If you've read Abolition of Man, you know the conditioners, capital C, that's what he's really nervous about. People who, well, if in fact we're all simply following conventions, then we need people to give us good conventions, and they'll be the elites, they'll be the conditioners. He believes that is this planner, this political planner or the scientist in the laboratory, he believes that it is the function of him and his kind to condition men to create consciences by eugenics, psychological manipulation of infants, state education, and mass propaganda. Because he is confused, he does not yet fully realize that those who create conscience cannot be subject to conscience themselves. In other words, if they believe that all that's happening when values are shaped is entirely arbitrary, then who's to say that the values they're trying to shape are worth shaping? He must awake to the logic of his position sooner or later, and when he does, what barrier remains between us and the final division of the race into a few conditioners who stand themselves outside morality and the many conditioned in whom such morality as the experts choose is produced at the experts' pleasure? If good means only the local ideology, how can those who invent the local ideology be guided by any idea of good themselves? If the very, and here, again, a very important political point, the very idea of freedom, and here he means political freedom, not spiritual freedom, the very idea of freedom presupposes some objective moral law which overarches rulers and ruled alike. Subjectivism about values is eternally incompatible with democracy. What an amazing thing to say, because we believe that subjectivism in values is what democracy is all about. Democracy is giving everyone the freedom to define reality, as the Supreme Court has told us in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, to define ultimate reality however they want. Lewis makes exactly the opposite claim, that the subjectivism, the idea of subjectivism about values is eternally incompatible with democracy. We and our rulers, and by democracy here, he means making sure, as Peter Berger wants to define democracy, democracy is summed up in being able to throw the bums out. Democracy has to do not so much with equality of power, but in the ability to eliminate tyrants. We and our rulers are of one kind only so long as we are subject to one law. But if there is no law of nature, capital L, capital N, the ethos of any society is the creation of its rulers, educators, and conditioners. I would say that marketers, advertisers, are the principal conditioners of our society at present. And every creator stands above and outside his own creation. In other words, the conditioners, since they're creating things, they're like our gods. So again, as I said at the beginning, Lewis wasn't really interested in politics, but he's very interested in the life of the polis. He's very interested in how a declension in understanding of the nature of the good has profound political implications and not good ones, not good. And again, the irony is that in the 60 years since he wrote this, not only has this view become entrenched, but it's become explicitly defended as a guarantor or as part of the fruit of democracy itself. Now, I wanted to get this on the table because I'm not going to talk much about Lewis for the rest of the evening, but I will tomorrow morning when we look at Lewis's critique. We'll quickly survey Lewis's critique of where science went wrong and why this reductionism is a problem in the Abolition of Man. And we'll also look at Lewis's ideas about